Till adultery is a felony in the state of Michigan, and when a married woman and single man commit adultery, the male is also guilty of a felony. Lots of states have laws on the books that are unenforceable. I doubt this survives a challenge if it is ever enforced. Come to England. We've got some ludicrous laws left over from medieval times. I'd assume that like those, this law is unenforceable. Lawrence v. Texas, a case more about privacy rights of gay couples, but also extends to the general idea that the government can't interfere with the private lives of consenting adults. In my husband's hometown there's a law that women can't wear pants. According to my mother's divorce lawyer, this law hasn't been enforced in decades, and that was already 10 years ago. Mobile, Alabama has a high heel law. It's against the law to wear high heels on the sidewalk because of the dangers of twisting an ankle. In Wilbur, Washington it's illegal to ride an ugly horse. Denver, Colorado illegal to drive a black car on Sunday. Of course all unenforceable. In my state you can still hunt Native Americans on Sunday and wolves. Hunting whale is illegal in landlocked Oklahoma. I just want to know what happened to set that in place. Someone dress up as Captain Ahab, and start chucking spears at SeaWorld? They're left on the books intentionally in most states. It allows people to Fifth Amendment their way out of being compelled to testify during divorce proceedings, or other interactions with the government that leave behind a public record. Utah repealed their law in 2019. According to Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, Trump had sex with Stormy Daniels in Utah in 2016, which would appear to be a crime under state law at the time. But I have zero idea whether that law was enforceable. Cities in CA have some funny laws on the books still, like, it is a crime for dogs to mate within 500 yards of a church. The law is punishable by a fine of $500 and or 6 months in prison. Los Angeles. It is illegal to have more than 2 cats or dogs. San Jose. No one may annoy a lizard in a city park. Fresno. No person may carry a fish into a bar. Portola. You are not permitted to wear cowboy boots unless you already own at least 2 cows. Blythe. A handful of states in the US have alienation of affections torts where a person can sue the person their spouse cheated on them with. The United States absolutely needs a law-removing body specifically to remove all these bogus and unenforceable laws from the books. Who determines if a law is enforceable or not? Something like mandatory sentencing for non-criminal drug crimes is completely ridiculous too, but still exists. Head on over to Lexington, KY. Just don't have an ice cream cone in your back pocket. It's an old law to discourage horse thieves. Canada, too. In Toronto, if you've been imprisoned for murder, upon release you can be provided with a horse and a loaded pistol so you can safely leave town. In Sulphur, LA it's illegal to use obscenities over the telephone. In New Orleans, it's actually illegal to practice fortune telling, and possibly helping people generally. Sector 54 to 312. Fortune telling. It shall be unlawful for any person to advertise for or engage in, for a moneyed consideration, the business of chronology, phrenology, astrology, palmistry, telling or pretending to tell fortunes, either with cards, hands, water, letters, or other devices or methods, or to hold out inducements, either through the press or otherwise, or to set forth his power to settle lovers' quarrels, to bring together the separated, to locate buried or hidden treasures, jewels, wills, bonds or other valuables, to remove evil influences, to give luck, to effect marriages, to heal sickness, to reveal secrets, to foretell the results of lawsuits, business transactions, investments of whatsoever nature, wills, deeds and or mortgages, to locate lost or absent friends or relatives, to reveal, remove and avoid domestic troubles or to bring together the bitterest enemies converting them into staunchest friends. But nothing herein contained shall apply to any branch of medical science, or to any religious worship. Oh good. Now if I only had a time machine and I could go back to when I was married and move to Michigan. How can a law be on the books but unenforceable? It won't. My ex-wife was arrested for adultery. The charges were dropped. It's not necessarily because they are unenforceable. Many if not all of them tend to be enforceable still. It's just they were written to combat a specific problem such as people cutting wire fences when ranching was big, so it became illegal to carry wire cutters in your pocket. However, it's no longer a problem, it just hasn't been taken off the books, but that doesn't mean it's not enforceable. There's a few states that still have alienation of affection laws, but I think out of them only NC really entertains them. Basically, the aggrieved spouse can sue the third party for wrecking their marriage. There's usually a high-profile suit every few years where the spouse is awarded a multi-million settlement. Hawaii, North Carolina, Mississippi, New Mexico, South Dakota, and Utah are the states which currently consider alienation of affection laws to be constitutional and have yet to repeal them. I thought about this, but the douchebag my wife cheated with didn't have a penny, wasn't worth it, easier to just cut ties and move on. That being said, if she had tried to pull any BS with money/assets, I absolutely would have. YTF would they sue the third party? It's the cheating spouse's fault. Hear that, Jolene? You can't take my man. NC will definitely enforce this if pressure is put on by the scorned lover. In the military, it is still a major thing not to cheat with a married spouse of a serviceman/woman. It is under the UCMJ and it is enforced pretty heavily. Since it is better to get the person through the MPs over someone hitting them with a wrench on a flight line or tossed off of a boat in the middle of the ocean. I'm in North Carolina and my old assistant/secretary had a guy's wife going after her on this. Ended up having to actually be interviewed myself to say that she was out of town on a business trip with me on a handful of dates that were evidently relevant to the case. It was nuts. She evidently had a thing for married men though. Later got knocked up by a partner at a venture capital firm we do some work with while we were on a business trip and got paid an obscene amount of money to sign all kinds of paperwork saying she would keep her mouth shut, and this CS me out like a week after a private investigator hired by some other guy's wife took pictures of her sleeping with him on his boat or something. It is also a crime for a male to seduce or debauch an unmarried female. It was even used in 2018. Thank God I live in the more enlightened state to the south, where I can debauch anyone I damn well please. Husbands also own their wives' hair. It's illegal to curse around women and children, and in my town the speed limit for ambulances is always 25 miles per hour. None of these apply anymore, obviously. How does one debauch a female? Asking for a friend. Curious what the statute of limitations is on this here law. Asking for a friend. Statute, it's 0 days. Because it's not enforceable. Congrats on the sex, big dog. Statute of limitations. LOL. Adultery is prosecuted to this day under the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, punishable by up to dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement for 1 year. I doubt any civilian laws are still enforceable though. I support that, long time ago, but a master sergeant in my bomber wing in Michigan was court-martialed for adultery. Funny thing is, he wasn't prosecuted when the adultery was discovered, he was prosecuted when his squadron commander ordered him to never have contact with the woman again and he violated that order. The civilian woman he was messing with, who was cheating on her deployed husband, and a married crew chief he had also been having sex with, both testified against him at the court-martial as part of a plea deal so they could avoid prosecution by the state and, in the case of the crew chief, the Air Force, dude got busted down to E2, threw away his career for some ass. The Uniform Code of Military Justice also prohibits adultery. The only unbelievable part of this is getting busted from E7 to E2. Busted to E2? Holy shit. Had a staff sergeant, E6, get busted down to PFC, E2, for adultery. His wife found the Facebook Messenger conversations. It might be ridiculous in a civilian environment but understandable in the military, to preserve unit cohesion. Make love not war, I guess. I mean deserved. If you've been around long enough to know the rules by heart and you still pull dumb shit like this, you can't be trusted to follow orders. Not to mention how scummy it is in general. That's some bullshit, but I guess you sign up for bullshit when you enlist. What about a married man and a single woman? What about two women married to each other sharing a single man without each other knowing? Plot twist, they are all step siblings. If I am remembering my Old Testament history class, from very long ago, correctly, the Bible only considered it adultery in the case of married women because another person was devaluing the property of the husband. Not surprising, it goes back to women being the property of their husband, and it therefore doesn't work in reverse. If that's all the law says, it sounds like the woman couldn't be found guilty in that case. Married women tend to be the ones treated as property of their husband, not the other way around. How can you charge someone for adultery if they didn't know they were married? Is everyone supposed to do background checks on their love interest to make sure they aren't married? You can be charged with breaking any law, but this law requires an intent to violate it, as most criminal law does. Also, the reason it is a felony is because it's legally fraud, which is also a felony. Marriage is a contract. Edit. Michigan Compiled Laws, MCL 551.103. A person who is 18 years of age or older may contract marriage. A person who is 16 years of age but is less than 18 years of age may contract marriage with the written consent of one of the parents of the person or the person's legal guardian, as provided in this section. The following law review explains the breach of contract of marriage is a tort claim where the injured party is damaged, and entitled to compensation by the offending parties. Every person is entitled to a certain remedy in the laws for all injuries or wrongs which he may receive. It resembles the widely recognized action of tortious interference with contract, the contract in this case being the contract of marriage. Adultery is a voluntary violation of the marriage contract, which deprives the partner of a legal right, and is likely to have financial repercussions. Fraud is an intentionally deceptive action designed to provide the perpetrator with an unlawful gain or to deny a right to a victim. Adultery is a term to mean to willingly, and fraudulently violate the part of a marriage contract specifically agreeing that both parties would provide that benefit to each other, and no one else. It is also a reason to lose your ability to become a U.S. citizen. Because it's a sign you'll be fraudulent to those closest to you, in that you have a tied mutual interest. Seems about the same as lying about age. The court doesn't care, you should just know apparently. When I was in the Marines, a guy in my platoon was punished by the UCMJ for adultery, lost rank and pay and was basically on house arrest for 45 days. Deserved. Fun fact, this is not only also the law in the U.S. military under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, and it is enforced for unit cohesion and morale. You're probably not going to watch the back of the guy you heard is screwing your wife behind your back. If both parties are military, both are punished. Even assuming one party is single, and is the only one in the military, this is still enforced, especially if the other party was a service member's spouse. Considering the ramifications of cheating within a unit, it's reasonable. However, there should be a way to separate cheating from having extramarital sex in a poly or separated, legal, not geographic, marriage in my own opinion. You're probably not going to watch the back of the guy you heard is screwing your wife. Jerry Falwell, Jr. would. This was my complaint on the Bill Clinton affair. It's illegal in the military, but the head of the military gets a pass. Yup, 10 years ago I was working with a former lieutenant who was functionally forced out of the Navy for screwing some guy's wife. 04 for the Navy has an actual selection process, and oftentimes if you have disciplinary actions you're not going any higher than 03. He didn't really care though, dude made more money, had better hours, and worked in the same field as he did while he was commissioned. Just got add to that, sodomy is also a very much enforced crime under the UCMJ. If you get a blowjob from your wife or stick it in her ass, then you can be fined, lose rank, and even do some time. All depends on if your commanding officer is a company or field grade officer, and if you go the Article 15 route or court martial. So, if they want to be a dick you can go down for just about anything. Oh yeah, it's also illegal to get VD. It's considered destruction of government property. It's also illegal in Michigan for a married woman to have her hair cut without her husband's permission. Swearing in front of women or children was illegal as well. About 20 years ago a man fell out of his canoe, swore up a storm, and because a woman with her children were in earshot, he was arrested and charged with breaking that law. The court exonerated him eventually and the law was deemed unconstitutional. The reason states don't change these laws is that it requires legislative effort, and if they aren't enforced anyway, it's basically a huge waste of time with absolutely no upside for the legislator attempting it. It could be easily spun into negative campaign fodder for their opponents, either spinning it so they're actually for the thing the law bans, or that they're wasting time and taxpayer money repealing unenforceable laws. Most lawmakers have more important things on their agenda. How is it constitutional to swear profusely in front of kids but not, say, expose your butt crack? Asking in earnest. You make it sound like the police just don't want to enforce these laws. Most of these laws have been overturned by court decisions or other laws and are thus completely invalid. Yeah, I want a citation for that. I don't believe it for a second, and neither should anyone else. Where in the statutes does it say that? George Costanza would like a word. He's driving to Ohio right now. Something about wanting to deliver the perfect insult. What about the other way around? If a married man is with a single woman, who faces charges? The man can be charged with adultery but not the single woman. The only special thing about this law vs other adultery laws is that it holds men responsible not to interfere in any other man's marriage. Same thing, adultery is adultery. This is not enforced, but, about a decade ago, there was a Michigan man who was prosecuted for using foul language in front of a woman and children. It was a pretty ridiculous situation. The guy capsized his canoe and made a scene. The family that witnessed it went full Karen, and had connections in local law enforcement. Never go full Karen. This is like the military but worse. Yeah, my wife didn't get a felony for adultery, but she did go to jail for assault and battery twice. Once for attacking me while going through our separation, and then against the poor guys she was cheating with. Your ex-wife is a piece of shit. How did you end up with her, chief? Michigander law student. Have never heard of this. Guessing it must be an old abandoned law that's not enforced, and would be struck down very quickly if challenged. If you dig deep enough you can find some weird laws anywhere, e.g. the law in London about handling a salmon in a suspicious manner. Or in Denmark if a Swede crosses the sea, or Orson Strait to be more specific, on foot, so after it has frozen over, a Dane is allowed to club them over the head with a stick. You could spend up to 2 years in prison for adultery in South Korea, my home country, until 2015. This went for both members of adultery. In Korea this was enforced. 53,000 people were convicted from 1985 onwards. This does make me think, is this adultery law in Michigan enforceable? Have there been cases where people were charged with a felony for adultery? South Korea is one of the most oppressive democratic governments in the world, though. Let's just make lying to your husband about who got you pregnant a felony and get rid of the antiquated adultery laws. I think adultery should be grounds for divorce without alimony or any other compensation across the board. I couldn't imagine if someone cheated on me then took half my shit. You forgot to add the part where none in the state GAF, and it's never enforced and is still sad. TBH, I feel like it should be enforced just differently. No criminal charges, but I feel if you cheat on your spouse you shouldn't be entitled to alimony or shared property. I'd be pretty pissed if my wife cheated then took the house I worked on and paid into for 10+ years. It was a felony in CT until the early 90s. It was never enforced, though. Until some lawyer from Westport had his wife not only cheating on him, but flaunting it and publicly ridiculing him over it. So he marched into the state police barracks, no sheriffs in CT, and demanded she be arrested. And so they sort of had to, seeing as they had a lawyer pointing out it was a felony. Made the papers, and there was a big outcry. Next session of state legislature, that law came off the books. What about married man and unmarried woman? Still a crime in the military and still heavily enforced. Honestly, it's not some single guy's job to keep everyone else's failing marriage together. In Michigan, a woman also can't get her hair cut without her husband's permission. What if she takes her ring off or says her husband died? Alienation of affection, back when men owned their wives. Welcome back to the Middle Ages. Till your mom is a felon. So wait a minute, what about a married man and an unmarried woman? Well, shit, I wish I had lived in Michigan. In California my wife cheated on me and it was a no-fault 50/50th state. I think I heard something more about this in a tort law class. From Illinois, it's not so much about the adultery itself but the emotional distress it can cause a family. therein the single person who was involved can be held liable for any damages it may have caused the family if there was any economic loss as a result. X. A family business shuts down for a while, so the single would have to reimburse the lost expected gain. Might be a slightly different and more archaic law in Michigan courts though. Thanks for watching. If you could like, subscribe and comment best Reddit stories for more Reddit videos.